and welcome to my Masks of Nyarlathotep series. Today I'm going to be walking through the England chapter, and if you've missed my other chapter walkthroughs, they'll be linked in the description below. So I would love to say that I could go through every single detail in these chapters, but that would make this video super long. So I'm just going to focus on my top keeper tips for running the chapter and what's most important to call out. This video is going to be full of spoilers, so if you'd like to have a glimpse of what this campaign is all about without the spoilers, I also have a video walking through all of that. But without further ado, let's get into England. The investigators will spend most of their time in London, but there are a few other elements like the cultist headquarters, the manufacturing area, and some of the sidetrack quests, which will take you outside of the city and get them an opportunity to experience the English countryside. This location will most likely be visited by your players in the first half of the campaign, and this is an opportunity for them to really start putting the pieces together about the Carlisle expedition. They'll also get the chance to get intermingled with cultist politics, learning about some confusing parts that are being manufactured, and have an opportunity to explore some of the different elements that England has to offer. This is the longest of the chapters, so expect to spend a lot of time here. It took my players about 6 to 7 sessions, and that equals roughly 24 hours of play. So just be prepared that you're going to be here for a fairly large amount of time. Overall enjoyment, this chapter was phenomenal. I had a fantastic time, and a lot of my really great memories from the campaign actually came from England. So in terms of overall ranking of the different chapters, I ranked this number 2 for overall enjoyment. Next, I want to break down why you want to play England versus why you might want to skip this chapter. Starting with the reasons why you would want to play England. So first of all, you're going to learn a lot about the Carlisle expedition, some of that background, and the importance of the Penhew Foundation, which this foundation actually will spread to other chapters throughout the campaign. Players will also get to experience a really well-developed cult. So this is the Brotherhood of the Black Pharaoh, the United Kingdom sect of it. And this is a very large cult organization that spans multiple countries. So it's really interesting to get the feel and experience of something that's really massive and probably feels overwhelming for your players, which is kind of the whole point of Call of Cthulhu. It also includes some really nice politics and tension within the cult, so it makes it feel more real. It's not just a group of people who are worshiping a thing and they're all aligned and together and everything's great and perfect with this cult. No, there are complications, there is tension, and there's opportunities for your players to get involved with that and really experience this living, breathing cult. England is also full of really foundational clues that give players glimpses of what Jackson Elias was actually trying to stop. So there's a lot of really essential clues included in this chapter that's going to start giving your players the idea of this overall campaign story. These clues will lead to multiple different chapters. So this is the part in the campaign that I really felt it expanded to be sandboxed truly. Most likely your players are going to go from New York to England. It's a pretty clear path to go to that chapter. But at this point, there's a lot of different options and you're well on your way to a truly sandbox campaign. The final reason you may want to play this chapter is there's 2 phenomenal sidetrack adventures that were just incredible to play and plan, so it will give more depth to the experience if you're able to fit those in. Now to the reasons you may want to skip playing England. And to be honest, I don't have any. You really should play this part of the campaign. It's very foundational and it's going to give your players a great experience and a lot of essential clues to move forward. The campaign books do a really good job of providing information for the keeper that allows them to bring the setting to life. So make sure you're reading through those setting sections, and I have some specific callouts for you here. England in the 1920s, there's a lot of elements you can play into, like the rainy, foggy, cold atmosphere. Bringing this kind of creepiness to this chapter is going to make your experience for the players really special. The book also supplies mechanics related to London fog, and I highly recommend that you use these in your campaign. This makes the investigators roll con and may result in some coughing or a penalty die. When your players arrive, it's a good idea to explain the atmosphere of a weird mix of cars and bicycles that are intermingling on the streets of England. Keeping in mind at this time there's a lot of laborer strikes going on as well, so there might be some of those happening. That just can bring a little bit more life to the experience. It's also important to note that different parts of England will have a different experience as well. So north of the Thames tends to be more rich population, so it's going to be nicer and a little bit safer to be in, whereas Soho is a more diverse population, but it also has a little bit more crime at this time in history. So bringing that more danger to life when they have to be in those areas will bring a little bit more interesting and different experience based on where they are in London. And of course, there's the opportunity to also contrast this with the countryside when they go to these other places outside of London. The cult is the Brotherhood of the Black Pharaoh, or at least a portion of it. The main branch is in Egypt, however, there's a huge following here in England. I'm going to call out what makes this cult unique so you can help differentiate it from the other cults that your players are going to experience throughout the campaign. Now, because this brotherhood originated from Egypt, it used to be primarily Egyptians that were a part of this cult, but now it's a nice mix of different nationalities that are a part of it in England. So it's important to note that when they interact with anyone from the cult, it could be from various different backgrounds, like Europeans, Indians, Arabs, and they're all working together to serve the Penhew Foundation, which was founded by Aubrey Penhew, who is a part of the original Carlisle expedition. What I found particularly unique about this cult is that there's a lot of different operations that they're involved with. So it's not just that they are working on this massive undertaking of trying to open a gate to bring destruction upon the world, which is the overall Masks of Nyarlathotep story, but there's other background operations that are happening for the cult. So in addition to the manufacturing of parts that are essential to this part of the story, they have operations including trading mythos artifacts, supplying and distributing drugs, and of course, recruitment of new members. A quick story from my campaign. So each chapter gives a little bit of guidance of how the cult's going to react when they find out the investigators are on their trail. And this chapter suggests using the Thing in the Fog. The Thing in the Fog is an invisible jelly-like horror, and its weakness is light. So my players did eventually find out that this was its weakness, and they were able to escape it without anyone getting majorly hurt. But they were really clueless as to why this was appearing, why it was following them into sewers, and who was controlling it. They really thought that it was just a random encounter that I had come up with, but it showed up a couple other times throughout England, and each time they were really confused. To this day, my players are still like, what was that weird invisible fog monster thing? And I don't tell them because the unknown is so much more fun. Next are key NPCs, where I'm going to go through some personality quirks and tips for how to display these different NPCs. The first is Mickey Mahoney, who is the editor of The Scoop. I've included this here to give you more of encouragement to have fun with some of these more minor NPCs. Mickey was all about getting the story, and it really didn't matter how the investigators got to it, but he was very encouraging to make sure that they were allies and that he would get any story that the investigators would supply. Mickey was very persuasive and a little bit too involved in what they were doing in England, and it got him into a little bit of trouble throughout the chapter. Also unique about England is there's really two leaders of the cult here. We have Gavigan and Shafik. Gavigan is from England and he's the high priest of the Brotherhood, but Shafik is from Egypt and was appointed by the leader there to really watch over and make sure that the cult operations were going as expected. I love this dynamic throughout the chapter of having the two basically fighting for control of this cult. Shafik, as you'll learn, has some ideas of how she's going to try and take over. So this is where the politics come in, and your players get the option to potentially ally with one or the other. Gavigan is intelligent and wealthy and has a really good reputation throughout London. He's going to take your players really seriously. He wants to teach them about Egypt, which is his passion, and he's going to be very well put together and just all around welcoming to your players. Shafik is the high priestess and is also a spice dealer. So she despises Gavigan and wants to take control of the London chapter. Her key personality trait to hone in on is her manipulative nature. So she's going to be able to influence the investigators and potentially ally with them. So the good thing is her role is pretty flexible. So mold her in a way that you think the players are going, and kind of use her as different avenues to collect clues or find out about this cult. In my game, my players did end up allying with Shafik, and they were able to get into one of the minor rituals that was happening on the island where the cult is headquartered. Now for the key locations. The first is the Penhew Foundation, which is very essential to this chapter. The Penhew Foundation is all about organizing overseas expeditions, supporting Egyptology through grants, negotiating permits, organizing different travel itineraries, and hiring local labor. It also houses info and artifacts related to Egypt. Here I want to highlight the secret basement. So this is kind of a similar feel to the Juju house back in the New York chapter. But what's awesome is it probably gives your players the false assumption that this is the headquarters for the cult. So when they find out it's actually on this island, it makes it a lot more impactful that they've explored this area in this building, thinking that they were probably having the operations here. If your players do get to the basement, take time to build the atmosphere. There's a lot of really cool stuff here related to the cult, like artifacts, scrolls, books, and art that your players can delve into and take time to explore, unless they're worried about getting caught. Next is Limehouse Docks. And remember the tips about setting here. This is a dirty and dangerous part of London, so bring contrast to your descriptions and encounters. There was a investigator who unfortunately got pickpocketed when he was here, and he was a pretty well put together person, so he was very distraught at this petty crime that occurred while he was in this part of London. There is a warehouse here that stores a lot of evidence, so mythos artifacts and the rocket parts that are being manufactured. Now, there's no specific clues that are going to be found here other than being confused probably by some of the parts that were manufactured. But if you have some clues that were missed earlier, this is a good opportunity to move them to this location. Probably the most important part in this area is the Ivory Wind, which is the ship that transports the goods. Now, if you're anything like my players, there might be an epic fight with some sailors on the boat. I think it's good to take the time beforehand to plan out the layout of the boat so that you can have different areas where they can go and know how to describe the fight as it's occurring. And your investigators will likely be left with the dilemma of what to do with this ship. If they're anything like my players, it'll end up in flames. Next is Henson Manufacturing, which is actually outside of London in Derby. This is where they're manufacturing all of these rocket parts to enable them to have the Great Gate opening. These parts are being fabricated from tech they found in the City of the Great Race in Australia. So this is a great time to note that the parts are going to look extremely foreign and they're not going to really be understanding what it's going to be used for. I want to reassure keepers that it's okay and probably good to have some mystery around these parts. They're not going to fully understand what they are, even if they have really good rolls. Also, make sure to look at the altercations and events section and keep track of what's going on during this part in the campaign. Finally, we have Mizra House, which is Gavigan's estate, also known as the cultist headquarters. The book includes lots of really cool history about the house and the Egyptian vibe going on at this location. So lean into that, and also remember there's tons of juicy clues here. So getting your players here will be a big benefit as they move through the campaign. Pay attention to the lunar calendar, as this is going to determine when they have their major rites, but they also have lesser rites every couple of weeks, so there is flexibility there to bring together your investigators and a rite that's going on for the cult. And remember, you can always bring the climax of this chapter to your players by having the cult attempt to capture them and bring them to this headquarters. How this worked out for my group is they allied with the High Priestess, which allowed them to get into this lesser rite that was going on, or party, if you will. My players had a really good plan. They actually split the group, and there's a watchtower off in the distance where they housed a sniper, and then they also got people into the party to be able to poison the leader, Gavigan. Now, of course, at this point, they knew that the cult was evil, so really they wanted to take care of both the High Priest and the High Priestess. They were able to successfully poison Gavigan, and the sniper had some really good rolls. So in addition to being a little bit lucky, they also had a really well thought out plan. So me as a keeper, I was helping them navigate the story so that they could experience this plan that they had laid out. So this was a really cool opportunity to see them infiltrate the cult and backstab this High Priestess by ending up and shooting her, and poisoning Gavigan, but also shooting him anyway, just in case. They left England in chaos, right? This cult now lost both of their leaders. They don't really have a structure anymore, and there's going to be more political chaos going on in England while they move on. I have a tip here for keepers that if your players leave the cult in chaos, there's always an option to have some of the cultists follow them on the boat to their next location. So my investigators next went to China, which is a little bit out of order of the book, but it worked out fine. And the cultists were able to follow them to China, and we had some cool chase scenes and interactions with them as they were over in this new location. Now to call out the 2 Sidetrack adventures in England, I actually wrote a guest blog post talking all about the Sidetrack adventures and the benefits of working them into the campaign, as well as my ranking of the best of these Sidetrack adventures. So I did want to mention there are 2 here, but I'm not going to go super in depth. It includes the Chelsea Serpent and the Derbyshire Horror, both of which are my favorite of the Sidetrack adventures throughout the campaign. The Chelsea Serpent includes a crazy painter and serpent people. One of my investigators got bit by a serpent person, and this isn't written in the book, but it worked really well for me. So this bite, I actually had them slowly spreading and turning them into a serpent person. They found out that the cure was located somewhere in Australia, so it was a little bit of extra incentive to go to that part of the campaign. Overall, I felt like Australia had the least amount of clues pointing towards it, so this was a benefit to make sure that the players knew that it was important throughout the campaign. The Derbyshire Horror, while at first seems like a werewolf scenario, it actually involves ghouls. This is all about a family curse, and written in the scenario is basically the hard choice of whether they're gonna let this daughter who has the curse just roam and murder innocents, or if they're going to take care of the problem. But there's a third solution that's not written in the scenario that if you'd like to include may be a good idea, and this is using magic. So they did end up learning a spell to be able to cure the curse from this family line, and it was not without its consequences. So just make sure that the cost is high for this, and that they're able to collect certain ingredients or certain elements that are essential to be able to spell this curse. Okay, this is a massive chapter, so when is it actually okay for your players to leave? Well, if they have these essential things, then they're good to move on to the next chapter. The first is learning that the cult is global and they have a large undertaking on their hands. Next, it's important that they have clues leading to at least 2 places. It doesn't matter which 2 countries they have, but just give your players options about where they want to go next. More on the Carlisle expedition, knowing that they spent time here prepping for the Egypt expedition, and who was here prepping. It's not totally essential that they know all the details, but it's important that they're starting to get a picture of the overall story. Investigators should know that something is being manufactured or that something is being shipped out of England that's really important to the cult's cause. They don't need to know what this is, and if they don't necessarily find Henson manufacturing, but they still know something's being shipped out, then I think that's okay too. As long as they know there's some suspicious activity that they're going to want to follow up on in other locations. And the final point is that there is an active expedition happening in Egypt that's being sponsored by the Penhew Foundation. This is going to be a really good area for them to start with once they go to the Egypt chapter. So having this foundational clue will be helpful moving forward. And that's it for England. Such a fantastic chapter, and I hope these tips helped you walk through and plan how you're going to get the investigators through England. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.